A young track athlete finds himself standing on the track, a track of 10 lanes. He's standing in lane 4. He's running the last leg of the half-mile relay. He doesn't know which lane he'll take the baton in because back in 1961, they ran in lanes for the first 2 people to complete 1 lap. Then the third runner broke for the inside lane. Since this young track athlete was taking the baton for the last time, he was watching to see where his team would come off as the third man headed in to him. If they were in first place, he would move down to lane 1. If second, he'd move lane to 2, and so forth. This young track athlete was running in the Compton Relays, Southern California, in 1961. A very important meet for any athlete striving to make the United States Olympic trials. This young track athlete was attempting to take a baton from his teammate and advance that baton faster than anyone else for the next 220 yards. He was running against the best in the nation. No room for error. He checked and double-checked everything that he had to do before receiving the baton. He looked at the mark he had placed, that when Gary Patterson, his teammate, reached that mark, he would turn and start his move. He looked at the line that began the zone, knowing that at that line, that's when the hand came back to receive the baton. He looked at a mark he had made halfway down that told him if he didn't have the baton by then, to start slowing down. He also double-checked the line that signified the end of the zone. If he didn't have the baton by then, he was to stop, turn around, and wait for the baton. He double-checked to make sure he had pictures going through his mind, pictures of taking off, bringing the hand back, keeping it solid, going out as hard as he can, making sure that he was to run the race with all his might, to run with endurance to the very finish. He thought about his running form, making sure his head stayed in the neutral position, the shoulders square, the arms, hands, and elbows going parallel to the midline of the body, the knees coming up 90 degrees, running on his toes and making sure he did negative plant, and all these things throwing through his head. But the most important, he knew he had to finish strong. He had to finish strong. As the sound of the gun started the race, he watched Jimmy Richardson get the greatest start of his life and run a perfect race. His exchange to Gary Gaudet was smooth and quick, and Gary Gaudet took the lead. Coming in to Gary Patterson, he had a 3-stride length lead, and their baton exchange was picture perfect. And Gary Patterson went to the inside lane, and the young track athlete moved down to lane 1. As Gary Patterson came around, and the picture started flowing through again what he had to do, and had to do it with absolute any error. When Gary reached that mark, he took off. He took off as if the devil himself was after him. The hand went back. He received the baton. It wasn't the best exchange, but it was good enough to retain the huge lead his teammates had given him. At the halfway mark, he realized he was losing that big lead. His head began to roll back on his shoulders. His shoulders began to roll. The arms and the elbows and the hands began to go across the midline. He began to corkscrew as he ran down the track. His running form began to deteriorate. He found himself falling completely out of rhythm. And with just a few yards to go, he knew he was in serious trouble. He began to slow down, and fighting through the pain of total exhaustion, he focused on the finish line and gave it one last supreme effort, and then blackness. As the blackness began to fade and the eyes opened, he could hear the shouting and the screaming and the clapping. You won! You won! Fantastic! What a performance! Unbelievable! You are the best. When the athlete was able to get up and walk around, he left the stadium, didn't wait for the remaining races to be run. It was late at night in Compton, California. The weather was hot, very muggy. The smog was very dense, air quality very poor. He was sick, and he wanted just to get home. And he started out across the parking lot. Within a few feet of his car, he was almost unable to walk. The pain and agony and disappointment that he felt shook his entire body. With tears running down his face, he knew he had hurt, he had cheated, he had disappointed, and failed himself and his teammates. But most important, even though he had won the race, he had failed God in his race of life. Hebrews 12 says, "Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking always to Jesus." Isaiah 40, "The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might, he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like the eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." These thoughts, these words of truth, buried deep in his heart. A young track athlete stood on an award stand to receive one of the highest medals to a collegiate athlete, an NCAA medal. The NCAA Regional Championships in Fresno, California. Year 1961 also. The young track athlete holding the medal high, proud of what he was able to accomplish. He enjoyed the accolades. He enjoyed the praises. He enjoyed the clapping from his fans and from his friends, teammates, coaches. The young track athlete could truly say, looking at this medal, "I am the best." It was the end of the season, end of his collegiate years, but it was a start on the road to the Olympics. The relay team that had run that year in the regional championships, NCAA, got together. Gary Patterson, Gary Gaudet, Jimmy Richardson, and this young track athlete. And they made a commitment, and they made a promise to each other. They had qualified for the Compton Relays. It was 5 weeks away. Each one was going their separate ways. They had graduated. They were out of college. They were on their own. But they made a pact and a promise and a commitment to be in Compton, California, 5 weeks from that night, ready to run, ready to win, ready to go to the Olympic trials. 5 weeks later at the Compton Relays, the young track athlete found himself practicing the baton exchange, getting the timing down. And it was very, very quickly in those workouts that he realized he had made a fatal error. His legs were weak. His breathing came in gasp. He was not in shape. During the 5 weeks, he did just enough to get by, thinking that was enough. Good was good enough, but it wasn't. The level of performance that was going to be required of him was not possible. And now the question came to him, what do I do? What do I do? And all these thoughts began to race through his mind. It may be racing through your mind if you're in the same position or have been in this position in your life, that you made a fatal error in your judgment. What do you do? Well, he thought, I could fake it. How is he going to do that? He had to run as part of the relay. How are you going to fake that you can't reach the speed that's required of you? Well, he said to himself, I can fake an injury. I'll run hurt and be a hero. They can't blame me for a poor performance if I'm hurt. Oh, I'll drop the baton. It's an accident. Can't run without a baton. We're finished. Oh, I can run and pick it up, do the best I can. He thought of every excuse he could possibly think of. And when the great I in his life began to fade, he realized that not only was he in serious trouble, the relay team was in serious trouble. And he went to his teammates, Jimmy, Gary, and he confessed. After the hurt and disappointment faded from the faces of these three young men, they got together and they said, we got to go to plan B. We don't know what that is, but we got to go plan B. What can we do? What is the possibilities? Well, certainly they couldn't run in the same order they had run before, because the young track athlete was the starter. He was the greatest starter that they had. He had already won the NCAA 100-yard dash. But he couldn't run first. Why? He'd be coming in too slow to Gary Gaudet. The timing wouldn't be right. They wouldn't get the baton exchanged. It would be dropped. And he couldn't run second, and he certainly couldn't run third. He couldn't receive a baton, nor could he pass it. What could he do? They put him last. And Jimmy Richardson and Gary Gaudet and Gary Patterson said, we will cover your mistake. We will give you a lead. Not just a lead, we will give you a substantial lead. All you have to do is get the baton and run to the finish. That's all you have to do. The young athlete stands in lane 4, 1961, Compton Relays, waiting to receive a baton that he wasn't in shape for and he wasn't worthy to carry. "54 years ago, I stood on the award stand in Fresno, California. I received the NCAA medal, the highest award to a collegiate. And as I held that medal high, as I'm doing now, it doesn't say I'm the best. God taught a serious life lesson to me. Ecclesiastes 9:10, whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your might. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord, not for men. 1 Corinthians 10:31, striving to do our best always to the glory of God. Striving for excellence to be the best is all about self. I'm not talking about perfection. I'm not talking about perfectionism. That's all the definition the world has for striving for excellence. God's definition is found in His Word. Corinthians 15:58, always be excellent and outstanding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. God sees our rewards and work and rewards us accordingly. I remember years and years ago reading a quote from Vince Lombardi. Most of you are too young to know who that was. Green Bay Packers, fabulous coach. He said, the quality of a man's life is in direct proportion to his commitment to excellence, regardless of his field of endeavor. There's a lot of truth in that. There's a lot that we can take. And as God worked in my heart, teaching me this extremely important life lesson, I never made that mistake again. What was the mistake that the young track athlete had? What was the mistake that I had made? The fact that I had runners in the past and still have that I coach, they run to exhaustion. They run to where they lose everything out of their stomach. And they'll turn to me and they'll say, Coach Whitmore, I did my best. If I had to be truthful with them, I'd say, no, you didn't. Now, I know you're looking at me and thinking, well, if that's not their best, what is their best? Yes, I ran to exhaustion. I blacked out. But I came unprepared. I made a decision in my life that I wasn't going to strive for excellence. I was going to let good be good enough. And good is never good enough for God. He wants all of us. He wants the best we can give Him. He doesn't want second best. Life is not about awards or medals. It's not about what you can do for yourself. It's all about relationships. My daughter Laura works in real estate. I said, what's the most important word you can come up with in real estate? She said, Dad, location, location, location. What's the most important thing in life? Relationships. 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 Anything you do in your life that has to do with relationships, strive for the best. Excel. Love God with all your heart, all your mind, with all your soul. Love His people with all your heart, all your mind, with all your soul. That relay team of Jimmy Richardson, Gary Gaudette, and Larry Whitmore never had a chance to run again. We broke up, went our separate ways, and I always thought, what if I would have been able to run that last leg to my potential, to be either the best that I could be. Not the best, my best. What would have happened? I'll never know. But you know, God, in His love for us, gave me an opportunity. And this is the baton. It's all cracked. It's worn. It's beaten. They don't make them out of wood anymore. But it still carries for those who are worthy. With God's blessing and the grace of God, I continue to pass this on. And I've passed it on to thousands and thousands and thousands, and I will continue to pass it on as long as my race of life continues. I won't be weary, and I won't be fighting the pain of total exhaustion. I'll run with endurance and keep passing the baton until my race is finished, and I will run strong to the finish. Pastor Brian?